Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle doing our pandemic projects, and today we're going to show you how to take off and replace a broken gear side plate on a Penn Senator 6.0 reel. The 114H doesn't have the 6.0 designation there. This one has a chip on the collar, but worse, it had a piece. I taped it to the handle. It had a piece here on the free spool jack that broke off, and of course if you don't have that stud, that piece just wanders around in there and eventually just fails. So I talked to the owner on this one, and he said go ahead and replace it. It's not a cheap repair. The piece itself is about $30, but if you want to keep the reel running, then that's your options. We checked the used market out there. There wasn't any matches. And one of the problems that you have with these older Senators is that the side plates don't, they have multiple colors to them. And in this case, it's not going to be a direct match, but it is going to be in the red family, I guess, rather than burgundy. And it is going to enable them to continue to go fishing with this reel. So we're going to show you how to do all of that. It's basically the same as tuning up a reel, because all of the pieces and parts need to be removed, and they should be examined while you're doing that. So if you have a 6.0 and you just want to know how to tune the reel up, well, stay tuned, because I'm going to show you basically the full take apart of this reel and how to do just that. So while I'm removing the pieces for the external side plate, the first thing I want to do is thank all of the essential personnel, regardless of what your role is, whether you're in a hospital, in a clinic, and long-term care facility, a prison, what have you, or you're just supporting all of those, EMT, first responders, police, fire. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And thank you for all you're doing in keeping us well during this pandemic. It makes a big difference, and it certainly is helping us to speed through the recovery here, even though speed at this point is 3 months in. So I've just taken off the collar and the two tension washers for the handle side for the star adjuster. A good note here, I'm wearing a protective glove on my hand here to try and keep most of the junk off of it. There's a lot of greases and things that get inside reels that I like to avoid, so I put a latex glove on there. They're becoming in short supply with the pandemic as well, but I have enough here to keep me going, I guess, in that box there. The other thing you'll notice, I have a parts tray behind me. All the pieces and parts that I take off are going into that parts tray so that I can find them when I go to reinstall. And also, if you don't know this reel, and I've had this reel apart and plenty of Senators apart, I know the reel, but if you don't know the reel, go out to the mysticparts.com website. They have the schematics for all of the Penn reels, and you can find the one that you're going to work on, and that'll give you a burst diagram of where all the pieces and parts go in case you get confused. And talk about confusing, here's one of those elements if you haven't had your reel open. The reel seat has shorter screws than the cross posts. You probably can see that there. This one's like 1 inch and that's like 1.5 inches. Make sure that when you go to reinstall that you realize that the 3 screws that are on the bottom of this one go to the reel seat and not the cross post. Now, the only reason I mention that is the longer screws will come through this reel seat here, and if the reel seat screw comes through, there's a chance of catching your line on that. Okay, if you're servicing this reel, as I mentioned, we've pretty much had this apart already. You want to just clean any excess grease that's accumulated in the back. Check the teeth on the click ratchet there, just the click tongue, to make sure that it's good. There's no way to replace that one unless it has a C-clip on it. This one doesn't. And then use a reel oil. In this case I'm using Reel X to oil that back bearing. Check to make sure that the bottom of the spool is clean, and then simply reinstall. Now you can also take your time to do what I call the laundry. You can clean it all up there, shine that chrome up and everything if you like during that. But right now we're just going to focus on getting the pieces off of this onto that. So first thing you want to do is take off the inside chrome ring You can generally pop that off by just leveraging a screwdriver here. Don't go prying, but it should just kind of pop off. And since we're going to transfer that, I'm going to grab a little piece of steel wool. This is 4/0 steel wool. It's a very mild, fine, extra fine kind of grit to it, but it's just enough to polish it, as you'll see there, and take off some of that wear. All right, we want to transfer all the pieces here to the new side plate. And there's 2 or 3 sub-assemblies here. There's a free spool assembly, there's the eccentric spring, and then there's the bridge assembly. So let's take these off. We're going to start by taking off the bridge. Then we'll show you where that broken part was internally and why this needed to be replaced. So there's 4 bridge screws. Again, if you're taking notes along the way here, 2 of these are fully threaded and 2 of these are partially threaded. Partially threaded ones go up top. That's a partially threaded screw. And then the full threaded screw are the 2 on the bottom. The partially threaded screws, there's springs that ride on those, so make sure that you get those correct as you go to reinstall. Alright, so here's your bridge assembly. We wanted to make sure that we got the spring out of there. And this bridge assembly has been serviced. As I mentioned, I was servicing it before I realized that the piece up here was cracked and that we had to order new. But let's just play along as though it hadn't been, and I'll show you how to go ahead and do that. So I've just removed the springs from the carrier. Now we're going to push the bearing through. And I don't need to do anything with this bearing at the moment. I don't need to put that into the parts tray. I can simply put that right back into the new assembly here. Press that down. Put a little bit of oil on that bearing, just like we did with the other one, and just let that sit for the rest of the parts there. There's one more piece that we have to remove here. That's the eccentric. And on this one, interestingly enough, since it's a big reel, the handle wrench for the smaller Penn reels actually fits the screw that holds the lever on. So we're going to take that off. We're going to remove the lever, then we can push the eccentric and screw through. Then we're going to turn right around and put this back in. So there's a stud where the spring portion of this goes. I'm going to grab a little bit of grease. I'm going to use Penn Precision Reel Grease for this. Just a little bit in there because it's a new case. Let's make sure that where it needs to slide, it will be able to slide. Put the tag end of the spring into that little crevice there, and we can just seat this eccentric in. Yep, the bearing came out. We'll just put that aside for a moment as we go to work on this. Now when you do this, what you're going to find is that the piece won't come all the way through. You can't put your lever on, right? So what you have to do is you have to grab what comes through, then rotate it approximately 90 degrees so that it's kind of at an equilibrium there. Then you can push the rest through and turn this around so that now you have the clearance on it. The only thing we need to do before then, though, is take this other trim ring off. And you can see the balance that we have there is that lever isn't going anywhere. I'm just looking for a little, one of my little picks at the moment here. So that I can get that trim ring off. This one's been on there a while, so okay, so it took a little bit of effort to get it off. There was some junk behind it, so there was no sense watching you watch me go get a little knife to use as a wedge there, so we did that. I'm just going to clean the inside of this. There's a little bit of aged something on there that's dried up and caused this thing to kind of stick, but that's okay. We'll do the same thing on the outside. We kind of cleaned that already. And then there's a little bump here that goes underneath there. So I'm going to As I mentioned before, we go crazy. You want to get that trim ring in. Line that up and press that on just like we've done there. Now you can bring your free spool lever back on. Grab the screw. And then just tighten it down. That'll pull everything together. And that's how you replace that lever. And you can see now on this, what's missing is the stud that was on that post. So that's what had to be replaced. Okay, now we can put that bearing back in, see if we can flip it again, because now I want to work on the yoke and the pinion gear. So we're going to grab the two pieces, the two springs here. I'm going to set those into the cavities. And we're going to just let that rest there. The yoke has to be cleaned a little bit. So let's go ahead and do that. And again, if you're servicing your reel, you want to get any dried grease that might be on here off. You want to inspect the pinion gear. In this case, it looks like a new pinion gear. The whole reel kind of looks neat, new. You want to check all those teeth to make sure that they're not dented or damaged. And we're just going to put a little bit of grease. You don't have to load it up all over it, but you want to put your grease in there. And then we'll install the jack by pushing down on the yoke assembly, grabbing the jack and just sliding it over, and now it's got the pinion. So what would have happened before without that pivot point there? This would just float and eventually would just come undone, and then you have nothing. Okay, we'll come over here and we'll show you how to service this, even though, as I mentioned before, it's kind of been serviced already. You want to remove your drag stack, and then you want to remove your gear sleeve. And in order to remove the gear sleeve, there's a little pin that holds it in here. Let's see if we can just push it out. Most of the time we can't. I don't have the hand strength. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this pin that I have. I probably have off camera on this, and I will apologize. I'm going to grab that pin and tap that down to drive the pin through, and you can see it's starting there. I'm just going to complete that now. So this pin is very helpful. I have a couple of different varieties of it. I have that, I have a carpenter's awl, and I have another smaller awl point here somewhere on the bench. But once you drive the pin through, you should be able to pull this off. When you pull that off, you can get at all the old grease. So you can see that there's been grease that's accumulated on there, and if you don't do this step, if you just kind of tell yourself that you know, it's okay underneath, you really haven't worked on it too much, then you run the risk of having it bogged down on you because it's old grease. I'm just going to grab a cotton swab and come in underneath this one just to make sure. And then I'm going to install new grease. So I'm just going to take that Penn Precision Reel Grease, just a little light coating on the stud. You don't want to put too much onto that shaft, because if you do, then you're going to bog it down that way. So, and then we can just put it back on the bench. Tap that pin back in. I'm using a dead blow hammer here. It's one of those little plastic hammers. Don't go using a metal on metal. It's never a good idea. And then I'm just going to press that pin in the last little bit with the pliers. You have to clear the shoulder on this. If you don't clear this shoulder with the pin, you're not going to get your main gear on. And there's just the littlest piece left here, so I'm just going to go back to that pin then. Just the way I poked it out, I'm just going to push it that way. Okay, got it now. Alright, and then we have a series of drag washers. So we'll clean the bottom. This one's fine. This is a hard washer. It's not a drag washer, so the hard washer goes in first. Do the same thing we did with the spool gear or pinion gear. Check all those teeth, and again, this one looks fine. An occasional dab of grease in a couple of different spots on the main gear. It'll all work its way in as it goes about spinning. Then we have a series of washers. This is a 7-drag system, I believe. I'm going to have to count them though. So these are good. There's a little bit of wear on them, but they're fine. Plenty of meat left on them. So I'm going to use Cal's Universal Drag Grease. I'm going to coat each one. Now there's a bell washer here. Don't confuse that one. That's the cap washer. So the way that this runs is it's a drag washer, and then it's a metal rounded washer. Again, we're going to do this several times. And it's the drag washer, and it's the first of the eared washers. You have 2 of these with the ears. Back to a drag washer. Again, if you get too much on there, wipe it off with a paper towel. Second of the round ones. Another drag washer. Last of the eared washers. Don't overload these drag washers with the drag grease. The drag grease is only there to keep it flexible. It has not much of another purpose to it. It doesn't increase or decrease your maximum drag or that. Last of the round washers, and then that bell washer. And this is more about drag tensioning. That's why it's conical as opposed to flat. Alright, so the last thing that we need to do on this one then is install the main. And we're going to do that by, one, getting some of the stuff off the table here so I can show you better. We're going to push this down. We're going to come over with the gear assembly, and we're going to rotate that about 90 degrees. I'm going to look for a fully threaded screw to come in from underneath. I'm going to grab that dog. That dog rests like that. I'm going to grab the flat bar. That's the spring that holds the dog together. And we're going to load that on top. It goes on top of the dog, goes around the post, and it rests against the side plate. Once we've done that, then we can complete the rotation. I want to make sure that you hear that pinion gear snap in there, and then you can tighten down the assembly. Okay, once you have that first one in, repeat then, put the second one in, and I like to go opposite corners. Just visually looking, checking, making sure that I can get that piece in. And I don't tighten them all the way. I like to leave them a quarter turn shy or whatever while I make sure that all of the other pieces get seated properly. We'll go over to the other top side here, even though it's upside down in your view right now. This is where the parts tray is convenient because you can look in there and find your pieces and parts, and never have. Well, I'm not having much luck today. The battery pack just quit on the camera, so we're going to pick it up here with the last of the screws. Make sure that that gets in. And once you feel them all seated, you can start with the last one and tighten them all down. Tighten them down in the opposite direction that you put them in. And again, you just want to make sure that you've got a nice even distribution pressure-wise. Then give it a turn before you go any further. Just make sure that it's operating the way it should. You can check your free spool release. Make sure that that's operating the way it should. And we can go reinstall the side plate then. The trim ring. That all came together nicely. You want to put a little bit of grease onto the jack here where it's going to slide in between the main plate and the yoke. And then we're ready to reinstall. So we're going to grab our brush with a little bit of grease onto the spool shaft. Going to line that up. And then we're going to start with a big screw. And I like to go kind of about east and west, north and south. So I'm going to start with a big screw. We'll call that one east just for fun. And I'm going to come over to west so it holds the assembly. And I generally don't start with the one that has the harness lug in it because you got two things going for you there. You got the hole for the assembly, and you've got the hole for the harness lug. And if you're just trying to get something evened up, it's a little bit of a balancing act. So go ahead and go west now. Then we'll grab one of the shorter screws for the wheel seat. And then we'll come up and we'll put the one in where the lug is. And if you're having a little difficulty aligning, then that's where this pin comes in again. It's a wonderful piece, the multi-purpose tool. Stick that in one of the opposite holes nearby and you should be able to align that center hole. And we can come back up top with a longer screw. Now we can go through the two. There we go. So again, you've seen how to fully service this wheel, even though the core issue here was a broken side plate. I've shown you how to go in and to take apart the side plate, how to redo the eccentric in case you have a broken eccentric spring. I've shown you how to service your drag stack, how to make sure that when you're servicing all that you pull the gear sleeve off, because there is dirt and grease and junk that does accumulate inside and underneath that does need to be removed during a service. And you're only cheating yourself if you skip that step, and it only takes a minute or two to do it, so there's no reason in the world why you should bypass that part of the service. And then we've shown you that even though there's different colored side plates, most of these things do adapt to the other versions. And the only thing you wouldn't get here, you can't use the black side plate for the 6.0 Senator. I don't believe you can. I do think that has a different design to it. Certainly does on the 4.0 Senator. I'm thinking maybe on the 6.0, but I could be incorrect on that one. Okay, then the last one here. And I know that one's going in because that's the one I used the peg to align on. Okay, then we come back to the other side. If you remember, we have that collar, and we have the two tensioning washers are on there. And actually, it should just be the one tensioning washer because the other one goes up under the reel handle there, I believe. It's not going to make much of a difference either way. And grab that handle. You use that to tighten down this star adjuster. Can put that other ring in here. And we can put the handle on. Then we're going to give it a turn and we'll see how we do. Now if we didn't take that gear sleeve off during the service, you could put some oil in there. That's kind of what Penn is telling you to do here, where it's got oil on this screw cap. And they're telling you as an intermediate step in between full services, go ahead and oil there. Then we're going to line one of the indentations in the scallops up with the hold fast screw. There we go. And the hold fast screw is first in and last out. That sounds like some kind of accounting thing, but it's the first piece you took off the reel. It's the last piece you put on the reel. So we've oiled the bearings. We should have a nice smooth operator here now, and we should have one with a free spool release that's going to stay tight. There we go. This hold fast is in. Let's give it a turn here and make sure that we got a nice operating reel, which we do. Let's give it a spin to make sure that the spool is operating freely, which it is. There you go. So the fish aren't going to mind that this is burgundy and this is red. You got a little bit of a compromise there, but it's fishable where this one wasn't fishable before. So I hope you've learned something today. If you have a 6.0 and you're looking to service it, then you have all the instructions and the ability to go do that now. And I wish you good fishing, and please stay healthy during this pandemic. And I'll kind of finish this the way I started. Thank you to all of the essential personnel, to the first responders, everyone that is working to keep us safe in this these difficult times. With that, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Thank you for watching.